This is the review for the Unit 6 test. Test will be on Friday, and it's 50 questions just like all the other ones. And keep in mind as you watch this that I go over each question, and in a roundabout way I pretty much give you the answer to each question. So there's no reason why you shouldn't do well if you watch this and really pay attention to what I'm saying, because there's usually hints in what I say. Alright, so first things first, Afghanistan. We didn't talk a whole lot about it. One thing you need to know, there's going to be several things, but one thing first off the bat is the fact that Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and that's one of the reasons why their economy is so poor, because they don't have access to the ocean, so therefore trading is much harder for them. So because of that lack of trade, lack of international trade, their economy suffers because of the fact that they're landlocked. Alright, and then Israel. There'll be several questions about Israel. You know, the advantage they have with having access to the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. So obviously it's just the opposite of Afghanistan. Afghanistan can't trade because of their lack of access to oceans, whereas in Israel has a Mediterranean and a Red Sea, and so they can trade with Europe. And they can also trade with East Asia, South End, also East Asia. So much more trade creates a stronger economy. And then with Islam, of course, several questions about Islam. Key things to remember. Obviously, the founder of Islam is Muhammad. Their main book is the Quran. The holiest city is Mecca. And also remember, Jerusalem is a holy city as well. To the Muslims, that's where the Dome of the Rock is located. And then for the Jews, that's where the Western Wall is, which is it's the only remaining wall from the temple that was destroyed about 2,000 years ago by the Romans. And for the Christians, that's where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is, which is a site where Jesus was crucified, and also the grave where they believe he was buried. And then OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. We talked about this several times in class. Those countries form together to control how much oil is released into the market. So basically they control the price of oil completely. If they want to raise the price of oil, they just cut back on production, prices go up. And most of the countries in OPEC are in the Middle East and have a rocky relationship with us. Alright, then remember what a theocracy is. Theocracy is a government that's controlled by religion. So in this case, in the Middle East, all the theocracies are Islamic. They're all controlled by Islam and based on the teachings of the Bible. Also make sure you know the geographical regions of the Middle East as far as what you would find in different areas. So obviously where the deserts are, the mountains, major rivers, things of that sort. So be able to know where on the map those items are located. You don't have to know their names or anything, just in general where they are. And then with the Palestinians and Israelites and that conflict there, make sure you know that they both want claim to Jerusalem. So they're not willing, neither side is willing to give up Jerusalem at all because it's such a holy city to them. So either way, they both want a part of Jerusalem. And then the reasons why there's tension between Israel and other countries in Southwest Asia, there's a few reasons. First off, Palestinians believe that, and along with the other countries in Southwest Asia, believe that that land where Israel is where the Palestinians should be. So they believe that the Israelites should be moved out so the Palestinians can have that land. Other reason is that Israel is mainly Jewish, which is a minority religion in the region, where most of them are Muslim, and so they don't feel like they really fit in there, basically. And we also talked about how some of those countries, like Iran, hate the Jews to an incredible extent, deny the Holocaust and things like that. We talked a little bit about Ahmadinejad and his view on the Jews. And then, of course, the West, the United States and Western Europe, tend to support Israel over other Southwestern Asian countries, showing preference to Israel over them, and they don't like that we always, for the most part, support Israel over them and back them up on everything they do. You know why we got involved in Afghanistan, fighting Afghanistan? That war is a direct result from 9/11. So because of September 11th, we attacked Afghanistan, the Taliban government, in response to that attack. Then the land between the Tigris and Euphrates River, which runs through Iraq, and then up, kind of wraps around by Jordan and Syria. That area, that land between the rivers, was referred to as Mesopotamia, which is Greek for land between the rivers. That area is very fertile. That's where you see a lot of farming. It's generally flat, and the rivers flood that region, leaving that silt behind, basically just like the Egyptians and what they relied on with the Nile River when we talked about how it would flood and leave that silt so they could farm. All right, countries in Southwest Asia that put a lot of their earnings from oil into education and healthcare, those countries are obviously going to have the highest HDI rankings, Human Development Index rankings. They're going to be much healthier, obviously. They're going to have longer life expectancies, more of an urban population, those kind of things. There's a question on here about the Aral Sea. Keep in mind, I'm using a test that all the geography teachers share. So some of them teach things a little bit differently than I do, and we all kind of do things a little different. So there's a question on here about the Aral Sea because a lot of teachers teach this with this unit, whereas I taught it when we went over Europe and Russia. So just keep in mind why the Aral Sea was shrinking. It had to do with over-irrigation, which is causing it to obviously shrink. And so the fishing industry around that region has fallen apart because it really can't sustain that anymore since the sea has become so small. And you need to know things that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity share as far as beliefs go. And it's very basic things. Obviously, all three are monotheistic. All three believe in some kind of ethical conduct. Basic things. They may have different views on it, but they at least have a moral code. Right, and you know why the U.S. is involved in Southwest Asia and not so much in Africa, considering Africa has so many issues. And keep in mind with what I said about Rwanda and the genocide there. The reason why we didn't get involved there in Rwanda was due to the fact that Rwanda really has nothing to offer the United States. There's no natural resource that they have that we really need, so we don't get involved. Whereas in Southwest Asia, they have oil, and we use oil, obviously, lots of it, and we definitely need it. And so we're much more involved in that region. So not because we think they need more help than Africa, it's just that we make more money off of them. All right, then what Middle Eastern countries need to do to survive successfully economically in the future? Because we talked about how oil one day is going to run out. And when oil runs out, what these countries are mainly one commodity countries, what is it that they're going to do to sustain their economies and their people on into the future? So we talked about, today, diversifying their economies, that they need to find other things to invest in and to develop in order to sustain these economies after oil is no longer a big thing, or maybe even out of the picture. Like Dubai, which we looked at today. Dubai is built on oil money. Eventually that's going to be gone. So how is Dubai going to sustain itself? Alright, then we also looked at some today about women and how they're treated in traditional Islamic societies like Saudi Arabia. So most of these societies, women, a lot of them can't drive. We talked about today how some, in certain societies, women have to ask permission to be able to drive from a male in their family, get written permission. Most of these women have dress codes that they have to veil themselves, pretty much their entire body, maybe veil their face, maybe not, just depends on the society they're in and what the dress code is in that particular country. Alright, the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. We talked about this, I talked about the Dead Sea, how you could float in it. Obviously you can float in any water, but the Dead Sea, how much salt there was that you pretty much could sit in it and hang out. But the Dead Sea is shrinking because the Jordan River is being irrigated so much to be used for farming. And so because of all that water leaving the Jordan River and going out to the farms through irrigation, the Dead Sea is beginning to shrink. And there was actually an article about that in the not the newspaper, but on BBC the other day about how they're going to deal with that problem. Alright, and then still with the water theme. Obviously, this entire region is mainly desert, and so water is a very important resource. And things they've done to hold on to their water. Drip irrigation, we talked about that with the hoses that run along the ground and the water goes through and then drips slowly into the ground. And how that keeps from a lot of evaporation occurring with the high temperatures. So you got drip irrigation, desalinization, that's where you take salt water, turn it into fresh water, and they use that to deal with their sewage. and then building dams to dam up water and keep high water reserves. And then there's also a question on here about Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Like I said, I taught this to y'all when we did Europe and Russia. But this is a pretty easy question. Basically, what you see in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are high literacy rates, meaning obviously the people can read and write. But generally, it's a uneducated society. They got pretty bad economies. So the question is how do they have these high rates of literacy without a good education system? And the answer to that is back when they were under the Soviet Union forced everyone to be educated. And so that's why they have these high literacy rates, but their economy really doesn't match the fact that they're educated to the point where they can read and write. Alright, the Kurds and the Palestinians, you know what they have in common? We talked about both groups. These are stateless nations. So they're groups of people that do not have a country to call their own. Palestinians were kicked out of the area they were in, and that's where Israel is today. And the Kurds are in Iraq, Turkey, and a little bit of Iran. All right, and then there's 3 regions. I need to know what they have in common: the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Those are the areas the Palestinians were forced into after the partition of 1947, when the UN separated Israel and Palestine. So remember, the Golan Heights, the northern part of Israel. Gaza Strip is along the southwestern coast along the Mediterranean, where the city of Gaza is. And then the West Bank is the region on the west bank of the Jordan River and along the Dead Sea. And Jerusalem is located within the West Bank. So those are the 3 areas that Palestine was supposed to occupy. Alright, need to know what Turkey, Egypt, and Panama have in common. And they all have in common strategic waterways. So for Turkey, they have the Dardanelles Strait. Egypt has the Suez Canal. And then, of course, Panama is the Panama Canal. So all 3 of those areas have strategic waterways that are very important for trade. And also if you ever go to war, cutting off trade to other areas. Alright, then another question about Central Asia. Central Asia generally is flat. It's used for livestock herding. It's temperate grassland in that region, so just know that that area is used for livestock herding. Again, we covered this when we talked about Russia. Alright, and there's a couple of map questions. So on the map questions, you'll need to know again where the main rivers are. You know what countries they're in. You'll need to know the countries that the United States has gone to war against. You need to be able to locate those. So obviously Afghanistan and Iraq. And then where theocratic governments are. So know in the Middle East where your theocratic governments are located. And then looking at population pyramids, one of the population pyramids, population pyramids we looked at today over Qatar showed a large amount of males between the ages of about 35 to 50. And I was talking about guest workers today, how a lot of these countries bring in workers from Europe, the United States, and East Asia because the local populations are so uneducated. So they have to bring these people in, which makes the population pyramid look a little strange because you have all these males on one side and about half the amount of females. So if you see another population pyramid, let's say on the test, if you see one where there's a bunch of males but there's not that many females, that shows that they're bringing in guest workers to work in that particular country. So they're not killing women, or it's not like a mass genocide of women or something like that. It's just they're bringing in these guest workers, and they're all males because they're not going to bring in women to work in these societies where women are obviously second-class citizens. So the last thing they're going to do is bring in women that are smart. Alright, then you know how oil is distributed among Southwestern Asian countries. And basically, it's that oil is not distributed evenly. Some countries in Southwest Asia have quite a bit more oil than others, like Saudi Arabia has a huge amount of oil compared to other countries like Jordan or Syria. So not all of them have the same amount, hence why some are much richer than others. And then again, going back to what a theocratic government was, as again you already know, it's a government that is It's controlled by religion, so some characteristics you would see in that type of government, obviously a lack of civil rights, kind of individual freedoms aren't going to be there. There's going to be censorship of things you can do, harsh religious laws, general repression amongst everyone. Alright, then terrorism in Southwest Asia. The main groups you see committing terrorist acts are going to be your stateless nations, because obviously they don't have a country to call their own. They don't have a homeland. They want one. So the Palestinians, for example, are going to turn to terrorism quite a bit against Israel. The other big reason for that is the fact they're so poor. I mean, like when we talked about the Palestinians, 75% of them are without a job. And so obviously they're going to be turning to crime. They're going to be turning to terrorism because that's the only way to get their voice out there. So they're pushed to take this extreme to get their voice heard. Just picketing and rioting and stuff isn't enough for them. Alright, then switching gears to climate, where you'd find the most moderate climates in Southwest Asia. Overall, the best climate is going to be along the Mediterranean because of the ocean, obviously. Regulates the climate. So basically, the coast of Israel, for the most part, is going to be the best area. And then where Israel was created, you need to know what was there before. That whole region there was Palestine beforehand. Palestine was owned by the British for a couple hundred years. And then when it got divided in 1947, that's what they tore apart, was Palestine. So Palestine does not exist anymore. Israel does. And then going back to Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, a few things again about that. I already covered the main things. Keep in mind that Islam sees Jesus as a prophet as well, but of course the difference between Islam and Christianity is that Christianity saw Jesus as the Son of God. Christianity and Judaism do not see Muhammad as a prophet, as a legitimate prophet, so they don't include any of his teachings or anything in their belief system. And also, Christianity and Islam have specific founders at a specific time. Muhammad around 622 AD, and Jesus, obviously, 2,000 years ago. Then the Arab Spring, I mentioned this some. The Arab Spring really lasts about 2-3 years up to this point, where we've seen a huge increase in revolutions promoting democracy throughout Southwest Asia. So really after the Iraq War has kind of come to a close, you started seeing these revolutions just take fire all over the Middle East and into North Africa, of people wanting to get democracy in their country as well. Alright, then go back to Israel again. Another thing you need to know about Israel, they have a very different government compared to everyone else in Southwest Asia. Israel has a democratically elected government like our own, whereas everywhere else in Southwest Asia is much more theocratic, more dictator-like. Then you know why women in developing countries face more hardships than women in developed. And it has to do with the unequal status between men and women. In your undeveloped countries or less developed countries, and they tend to be more male-dominated societies. You haven't seen the equal rights movement take root yet in those countries. So as they become more developed, you start seeing more economic freedoms for women and also civil rights as well. So like I said, in the video, I pretty much give you the answers to the test as long as you really listen and understand everything I talk about. If you don't get anything coming in tutoring, I'll be in school, or at school after school tomorrow, to about 4:45, and then Friday I get there about 7:30. I'll talk to y'all soon.